Welcome to today's podcast episode of Little by Little Homeschool. I am so blessed to be joined today by Jennifer Pepito, and I cannot wait to share this episode and just share everything she's going to say. So, welcome to the podcast, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me, Leigh. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. So, let's start off. If you could share a little bit about yourself, just so that the listener can become a little acquainted with you if they're not sure who you are, but by the end of this episode, they are definitely going to know a bit more about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm the homeschool mom of seven children. I've been married for 34 years. My husband and I just had our date anniversary. So our first date was 35 years ago on February 24th. And I have homeschooled for 27 years. My youngest is 16 years old, and we're transitioning at this point. We live in California, so you can enroll in charter schools. I'm not a big fan of them. I want to caveat that. I'm not a big fan, but in this season, with this child who really enjoys science, we were excited about on-campus biology and math so that he'd be better equipped for future science careers. And yeah, I've been homeschooling for a long time. 10 years ago, I created the Peaceful Press homeschool curriculum. It'll be actually our ninth anniversary in June. And in those resources, we help families really love learning with their children. They're literature based with projects. And the early years, we focus on development through fine and large motor skills. And then we move into just beautiful books and narrations and projects to help children really develop a foundational love of learning.
I like that you have shared a little bit about your journey and you've probably seen that homeschool can look so different and the fact that we get to meet our kids right where they're at. So that is so cool that even though maybe it's not your first preference for him, but you see that what you're doing is going to help give him that foundation for what he's looking for in the future. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I love that you noticed that because I think it's so important. I'm actually reading about Blaise Pascal right now, who was, a famous mathematician, scientist. He supposedly invented the syringe and the hydraulic press and several different mathematical theorems, but his dad educated him, and his dad really tailored the education to him. Like he wasn't going to teach him math early on, and then he saw, Blaise went and looked up Euclid on his own and started drawing geometrical figures and trying to make theorems out of them. And so his dad noticed that, and they joined this academy that was founded by another scientist where they could really be in a community of learners. And it was just so inspiring to see how, Blaise Pascal's contributions to society happened partly because his dad cared enough about him to be sensitive and aware and responsive to what he needed.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story because I think that in homeschooling, we get so conditioned in the school mindset and we get to really create a tailor-made education. So let's jump to the other end of that and let's jump down to the younger kids. And there's a lot of moms who listen that have young children. And we can get so easily focused on the curriculum and the academics that we unintentionally think about, well, I'm going to say in air quotes, the basics. And we think that those aren't important. And one of those basics is motor skills. Can you explain what motor skills are, why it's important, and how a mom can provide opportunities for her child to develop good motor skills?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because that is one of the highlights of the Peaceful Press early years curriculum is we actually include fine and large motor skills. And here's why it's important. So many kids who have dyslexia, for instance, part of that is a visual tracking issue. It might also be an auditory processing issue. And those kinds of things can be worked on in the early years by, when you lace a card, for instance, there's those little lacing activities. We have several of those in the Peaceful Press where you get some yarn and you put some tape around the end of it so it sticks up stiff like a needle, and then you lace it through holes that you punch around a piece of cardboard. Something like that helps your children with visual tracking. And when they can put that little piece of yarn from hole to hole in a row, they're going to have an easier time tracing letters on a page and putting them together. Listening to stories or clapping out syllables or reading poetry together, all of those things help develop your children's auditory awareness so that when you have them sound out a word like garage, they can actually keep in mind each phonogram as they go. so that they can sound out the whole word. A child with underdeveloped motor skills, underdeveloped auditory awareness will really have a hard time with retaining the information or processing efficiently. And so, I had a daughter with special needs. And so we worked with an occupational therapist, we worked with a neurodevelopmentalist, and many of the activities that I incorporated in here were the ones that we worked on with her, so that for children, whether they are neurodiverse or whether they're normal children, they're getting those motor skills practices that are necessary for one day being able to hold a pencil properly and write an essay, or being able to type. So many of the skills that we need for academics are laid in that foundation of motor skills early on. And the other thing that's unique about the Peaceful Press is we include practical skills, because the work that you do on a page, the academic work, is not the most important work in the early years. That can be taught so quickly. There's some studies that say it can be taught in only 2 or 3 years of formal skill study, everything you need for success in high school. Another study said in 100 hours. So there's different studies that show that the academic basics can be taught really quickly. But if your child doesn't have for instance, categorizing skills to unload the silverware and put them in the right slots, or to match up socks, those are all skills that help you later on to put information where it goes. Like if you're writing an essay and you need to have a cohesive paragraph, if you have done a lot of work earlier in your childhood of like putting things in their place or organizing things, you're going to have an easier time later on organizing thoughts into a cohesive essay. So all of that is so integral to a well-educated child. And unfortunately, because so many kids are, inside or on screens or in very supervised play, they're not necessarily getting all the sensory motor activities that would make them strong in these areas, help them have good posture, those kinds of things. And that's what we include in our early years homeschool resources.
That is, I feel like it's so freeing. So if you have preschoolers and you're listening, don't feel like you have to. And there's nothing wrong with if you want to do workbooks, but I love that you're saying, what I'm hearing is that the motor skills mastery leads to success with academics later on down the road. And that academic, sometimes we can feel like this is a waste of time. And those lace-up cards, they're so fun. They're so fun to do. I remember doing it even too, along with my preschooler. And we feel like that's a waste of time, but it absolutely is not. So thank you for that. You have science, you have information and studies behind to back that up. So yeah, that's great. And we sometimes can think like, oh, the categorizing of things and just the simple putting the knives with the knives and the forks and the spoons, we feel like, and it can feel like, oh, it's taking them forever to empty the dishwasher and to do this. But they're learning, and those are skills that it sounds like what they're learning, skills that will help their brain later on when they come to the science or the history and the math and all of the things that will come on later on down the road.
Yes, that is so true, Lee. And it's so important to, just have a balanced approach to education, because our children are more than their brains. And even, in throughout our homeschool years, one of the things that we focus on is having a little bit of margin, because a lot of the things that come up during the day, the baby's crying and so you have to stop and nurse them, or siblings start fighting and so you have to stop and intervene. Those are part of the school. Like, we often look at those things as interruptions, but when we're talking to our children about what's happening and we're explaining to them, or we're working through conflict together, that is part of the education. I read a study recently that said that social emotional skills are one of the biggest indicators of future life success. And so in your homeschool, if you're prioritizing relationships, if you're working on eye contact and connection and helping your children work through conflict, that is also part of the schooling. And so you shouldn't, as a mom, feel like you're failing because you didn't get through the phonics lesson for the day, or because you didn't get to the art project. Like, all of the life that you're doing, the life that you're living with your children, the conversations you're having, that's all part of the education, and it shouldn't be underappreciated as an essential part of that.
There's a message that often is the opposite of what you're saying, is what we get from people that usually are, I'll say, ignorant, that not that they are ignorant, but they don't understand homeschooling. And they're saying, well, how are they going to get this? How are they going to get socialized? And moms will sometimes think, oh, we're just home, especially when you have a new baby and you're just home. I remember there being years. I remember the first time after my kids were always nappers at home. I don't know. I never got to that point where my kids would just nap out. So we were always home. And so I was home with just, three kids, boom, boom, boom. And it was probably about, I don't know, 10 years until I finally was out somewhere at 2 in the afternoon and like, wow, people are actually still out and about. Not everybody stops and takes a nap, every single day at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But so we were just home and it was just them a little insulated, and we can feel like that's not enough. But there's a lot, as you're saying, conflict resolution. There's a lot of that goes on.
Yeah, and as well, if you've ever read Kim John Payne's book Simplicity Parenting, having that early, quiet, rhythmic life is very regulating for children. And so the more important things for those young children of really having a healthy, strong attachment to a primary caregiver is being formed in those quiet years. And so I think, culture just there's a lot of ignorance, and it's not malicious, but I think that we have to stop worrying about what people who really don't know what they're talking about have to say about children's development. And even, you look at the school system, like it's absolutely not based on healthy child development, what they're doing to kids, with all the homework and the seat work and medicating kids who have a hard time with that. And so we need to stop letting people like that be our inner voice or our conscience when they really haven't proven to be caring adults. And I think COVID especially showed that up when, when the culture, like we live in California, I don't know what it was like in New York, but culture, sent all the kids home to work on computers, shut all the playgrounds, shut the nature areas. Like, these people in power don't really care about our kids. They don't understand what they need. And so we should stop letting them tell us how to parent.
All right, we might just end right there, but we're not going to. That's like a mic drop right there. Thank you, Jennifer. So let's move into talking about your peaceful preschool. And so many moms tell me, and I'm sure you hear too, that the preschool age children in their home, that they add a level of chaos, and that can be overwhelming. So how would a mom go about creating a peaceful preschool experience for her homeschool child?
Yeah, and I think a big part of the chaos is often unmet relational needs, because children will behave badly when they need attention. They don't know how to say, I don't really feel like you care about me right now. They don't know how to say that. And they don't know how to say, often a toddler doesn't even really know how to say, I'm really hungry. Can you give me a snack? They just start misbehaving. And so, kind of being aware of what those needs are and meeting them before it becomes a crisis is a big part of having a peaceful environment, because probably a lot of people listening have preschoolers and other children. It's one thing to meet the needs of a preschooler when it's your oldest child or your only child, but it's another thing when you're trying to, maybe homeschool an older child or potty train a younger sibling or whatever it is. And so, a big part of it is meeting those emotional and relational needs first. The peaceful preschool has activities they could be done in a half hour to an hour a day. And if you were homeschooling older children, you don't even have to do all of them. But at least if you took a little bit of time to, cuddle your child and read a story to them, give them some eye contact while you're brushing their teeth, make sure they had a healthy, high protein breakfast, those just some little simple things like that. And then most preschoolers could play for a little while on their own. And in the peaceful preschool, some of that philosophy was based on Montessori philosophy. And one of the things that she really emphasized was having an environment that is safe for your preschooler to sort of manage themselves by themselves. So for instance, we would have a little shelf. When I was homeschooling, I had 7 children, but probably was only homeschooling about 6 at a time. And we had a little shelf for the preschooler. So if I was doing lessons with the older kids, a preschooler could go to the shelf, pick up their little, there was a little basket with like lacing beads, or there was a puzzle, there was a little paint tray. And so they could pick up the activity, take it to the table, do it, and then put it back, and there would be no harm done. And so I didn't try to, I had things set up in a way that my preschoolers could kind of entertain themselves while I was doing the homeschool time. Because we were doing morning time throughout those years, I often was breastfeeding during morning time, or I had preschoolers sitting, I had a little child-sized table that sat right by my chair. And so I could kind of like be there and be attentive to the preschoolers while I was reading to the older kids. the preschoolers sat in on big readings, on big ideas, and I love that it really helped expand their ideas. I remember a 4-year old making up a little poem about Beowulf because I was reading about him to the older kids. And so, that was one of the keys. But we also did things like having snack. A lot of people do their morning time at the breakfast table so that everybody is sitting there eating, they're comfortable, they're satisfied, their mouths are full, so there's not a lot of talking. And so having some strategies like that where you time certain things for the times of the day that are right for those things can be wise as well. And just, being responsive, I think, is the biggest key, knowing your kids, really paying attention to what they need and not just continually rushing around, overscheduling yourself so you have no idea what's actually going on.
So going back to what you're saying is just at the beginning was that it's okay to have just those rhythmic days, those quiet days. And the book that you referenced, and yes, I'm pretty sure I read that one, The Simplicity of Parenting. And it's not a bad thing. Sometimes we can feel like we look at other families that are doing this and they're off and they're coming and going and all these things, and we feel like we're less than. And in our culture, that busyness is celebrated, and it's okay to slow down. I remember, I don't know if I read it somewhere, or someone told me, could have been my mom who told me, but how you're talking about the chaos can come from unmet needs is that any attention is sometimes better than no attention. So I'm not saying that moms are completely ignoring their preschoolers, but they might be having some of their bad behavior might be because they'll get some attention then. And so having that time of them being with you or reading to them or cuddling them, meeting their needs first, I saw that firsthand with my own kids.
Yeah. And the season is over fast. Like, I think, for modern moms, we do have a lot of distractions. Like, when I was parenting my preschoolers, the cell phone, I don't think it was invented yet, or I didn't have one. Like, I didn't have a smartphone yet for most of my parenting career, thank God. And so it was a lot easier to, really focus on my homeschool. The worst thing would be, if one of my sisters called and then I got involved in a phone conversation. And of course, then I was like, distracted from my homeschool. My kids would start running off to play. But now, as modern moms, like, we have to be careful we're not picking up our phone during the times that we're trying to be intentional parents, because it doesn't go together. Like, when we are on our phone, we aren't able to be present with our kids, and the phones really are killing our attention span. It's making it harder for us to stick with it and to do the reading aloud, or do the sit there and play a board game with our kids. It's killing our attention span, so we have to be careful that we're not just all living a digital life and then not having any ability to impact our children, and not to mention just the developmental loss that happens when kids aren't outside playing in the real world, or aren't building things or making things with their hands.
I think there's been way more awareness of that. I feel like it often some new technology comes in and we all embrace it without looking at the possible ramifications and what could happen on the other side of this. And I feel like parents are finally starting to realize this. And it's not just our kids. I thank you for pointing that out. It's not just our kids, it's us as well. And sometimes we could think, what's wrong with me? Well, maybe my attention is so low because I'm so used to my phone and I'm so used to a 10-second video that's going to capture my attention, and I get to move on to the other one and get that dopamine hit. And I was like you, I didn't have a smartphone until I guess it was maybe about 10 years ago. So my oldest would have been 12. So I had to walk through that. And there was times that I failed at it, and my kids kind of shined a light. There was like a mirror on me one day when my son was drawing a picture in one of his school books. He was probably supposed to be doing his math work and he wasn't, but he drew a picture of me standing there on my phone, and it just like, ugh, it like cut me. And I was like, okay, that was the beginning of my awareness. And it is a struggle. And I find for myself that when I turn my ringer off, and my husband works and he works from home, so I know that if one of my kids has an emergency or something, he has his phone because he's using it for work, so he can get a hold of me. So I do feel lucky that I can do that, but I'll turn it off and just put it away somewhere. And I'm so much more productive. I get my to-do list, I get my cleaning done, and get all of these things done that we don't constantly have to be having something in front of us, or even constantly be listening to something or watching something.
Yeah, it's so true. We have to have a little bit of mental space. In my restoration home mom community this month, the habit is no screen time before our morning routine. And so just having that integrity of saying, okay, I'm not going to pick up my phone until after I've done a morning routine. And it's so much better for our nervous system, even to have those boundaries in place so that we can, be present and just be in the real world.
So you mentioned habits. I want to talk a little bit about that. And one of the best ways that we can help our children in their academics and just life overall is to have good habits. So how does a homeschool mom instill good habits in her children?
Yeah, I mean, it is baby steps. We talk a lot in the Restoration Home community about 1% improvement. And, for me, like we would have a little mantra that I would say in the mornings. It was like, brush your teeth, make your bed, read your Bible, get dressed, clean your room. It was like there was a few things that I would just sort of announce in the morning. And we had, chore charts. And so as adults, my kids make their beds. They keep their spaces tidy. They have it's almost like they've been acculturated to a certain standard. Do you know what I mean? Because we had those habits. And so I think it's partly just knowing what is important to work on. And that's the big message of Habits for a Sacred Home is just like, here's the values. These are historic Christian values. And what are the habits that you're going to put into place to keep these habits rolling along? Because what we're doing as homeschool moms is very counterculture in so many ways. It's like we're actually having a habit of eating dinner as a family, or we're having a habit of reading the Bible together. We're having a habit of looking our children in the eyes. These are things that a lot of the world doesn't think about at all. And so as we're doing this, we are, sort of like partnering with the Lord to bring health and wholeness to our culture. And so they're not small things. It's like sometimes we think, oh, habits, what does that have to do with anything? And especially the habits that we're developing in our but those habits, like if you have a habit of reading the Bible every day, then you're letting your mind be renewed every day. And so it's a hedge against all of the perversity in the world. If you have a habit of, not eating sugar at every meal, or if you have a habit of drinking water before you drink your coffee, or a habit of taking a walk together every day, like just these little small things are sort of inching our families towards a healthier life. And so the Restoration Home community, we focus on 3 habits per month because it is really hard when you go to a conference or something and you're so inspired, you go home and you're like, I'm going to revamp everything and we're going to have good habits. And, and then there can be this sense of failure, but we just work on 3 at a time. So in February, we worked on reading aloud every day, taking 15 minutes to declutter every day, and doing some kind of a workout, some kind of movement every day. So I think if you, as a mom who's listening, can just maybe pick a couple things, pick a new morning routine that's going to help you have more stability in your morning. Or, one of the things that we focus on, and this isn't so much a habit, but meals are such a huge part of our life. Do you know what I mean? Like trying to feed all these people is huge. And so we do a lot of we have a 28-day meal plan, but we also just do the same things a lot. Just have some of these things automated, have some systems where, okay, Monday's oatmeal, Tuesday's eggs, Wednesday's peanut butter and jelly, just have some things automated so that you don't have to make a decision for everything every day.
I like that meal plan idea because there's a lot of decisions that we have to make every single day. And just the doing that, when you said the 1% improvement and coming home from a conference or reading a book or listening to a podcast episode, and you're like, oh, I'm going to do all of these things. And then we can crash and burn because there's too much. But just adding in, like you're saying, you're with your group, you're doing 3 at a time. But I would say, even if you just can do 1 right now, just decide what that is. And I know we're getting here to the spring and warmer weather. Maybe it's to take a walk, and just seeing how those things can improve our entire lives. And then our kids can catch on to this as well. And I appreciate that you said that habits are historical Christian values. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. It can be so simple. And we try to create some type of big, huge thing around it. But it's just like maybe a habit of just eating dinner together as a family more nights of the week than you don't. And kids will catch on to that and hopefully then carry that into their lives as well. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining me today. But I'd love to end this episode and have you share a favorite homeschool memory with us.
Oh, this one's easy. I mean, I loved homeschooling my children. It has been so much fun. We did a lot of field trips. We went to like the Jelly Belly factory, went to art museums, we went to nature preserves. We went to the Colosseum in Rome. Like, we had some fantastic field trips over the course of our homeschool years. But one memory that I've been thinking about lately, because I'm writing about science in a new book I'm writing, is we made water wheels. We were using the Precious People, which is my world history curriculum, and we were in a month on transportation. So we were looking at early forms of transportation, the wheel, and even the way they moved water from one place to another, and how they early ways of generating power, things like that. And so we made water wheels in our co-op. We had a co-op where we were doing our Peaceful Press resources together, and we have actually a free co-op guide on our website. But we so we taped all these little cups to a plate, and we taped them in such a way that as the wheel turned, they would catch the water that was floating down the stream, and they would start turning the wheel. And then we taped the plates together, and we put a skewer through the middle so that it could turn. And then we walk over to this little creek, and it was winter. So the creek it wasn't like dangerous, because we had a lot of small children. It wasn't dangerous, but it wasn't a little teeny stream either. And so we kneeled down by the creek, and we set our water wheels in the creek. We're holding the skewers. But I think that some of us were holding the skewer just by one side, and the water, the wheel started turning. The water started getting caught in the cups, and the wheel started turning, but it also split the wheels. So we hadn't maybe taped them close. Like, we hadn't taped the plates together around the cups tightly enough, and the wheels started splitting and going off and falling off the skewer. Basically, the water was dragging them off the skewer, and so then we were littering. And I was like, "Oh shoot!" Like, we came to this beautiful little nature preserve, this little creek. We are not going to litter. So then the homeschool boys, I'm sure some of the girls were into it also. I'm not trying to be sexist here. But I definitely remember, like, my son and some of his buddies going after the trash, which, every homeschooler, I mean, every child loves to play in water, right? Like, water is, how often will a kid right in the middle of winter when it's freezing out go jump in a puddle? And so it was so fun. All these kids like racing after these bits and pieces of the water wheel. And there was a lot of laughter, and it was exciting. The water wheel worked, but then also we had this second problem of not littering. And that is how science works, isn't it? That you try something, you test it out, and then you go back to the drawing board and fix what's not working. So it was, I mean, I've had so many memories like that of projects with my kids, and reading books and crying over them together, and just like the happiest times. And there's actually a lot of science that says that when you are thinking of a happy memory, or when you are in a state of joy, your relational circuits are turned on, and you are better able to learn. And I think this is really important for homeschool families, because sometimes moms are nervous about falling behind or messing up. And so then, and even not homeschool moms, all moms are kind of motivated by these same ideas that I got to do it right, and I got to get it perfect, and I got to make sure my kids are well educated. But if you're not having any fun as a family, you're actually hindering your children's learning. And so some of the memories that really stir up joy in our lives, those can be things that we think about. If you have a toddler who's melting down, start talking about something fun you did together, or something fun you will do together, and see how that affects things. But also for your family, just recognizing that it is important to build in joy. And so whether that is celebrating a holiday, we have a lot of holiday guides on our website, whether that is going on a field trip or doing a project, it's important to build in joy for the sake of your children, for their learning, for their mental health, for their physical health. It's a key part of learning.
Thank you for that. We should enjoy homeschooling as well. So thank you. Jennifer, where can the listener connect more with you? I know you've mentioned a couple different resources. Where can we send them?
Yeah, if you go to thepeacefulpress.com, all of my books, my community, our resources are all linked there, our podcast as well. So it's all linked at thepeacefulpress.com.
Perfect. I will link that in the show notes. So listener, go over and check that all out, find out all that she has. So Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Leigh. What a joy it was to chat with you.
Thank you for listening, friend. I'd love to connect with you more. You can find social media links in the show notes, and share this episode with a friend who could use a boost to her homeschool. See you back here real soon.